On a humid August morning in 2006, Father Michael O'Brien knelt on the worn wooden floorboards of St. Augustine's Catholic Church in New Orleans, Louisiana, preparing to inspect water damage in the sanctuary. What he discovered beneath those century-old planks would unravel one of the most audacious and patient crimes in American history. Hidden in a carefully constructed compartment, wrapped in deteriorating canvas and plastic sheeting, sat nearly $2.8 million in cash, the remnants of a 1983 armored car heist that had baffled the FBI for over 2 decades. The money had been, there since October 1983, placed by a man who understood that the last place anyone would look for stolen cash was in the house of God. For 23 years, worshippers had prayed above it, children had been baptized near it, and countless masses had been celebrated within feet of one of the largest unsolved thefts in Louisiana history. The criminal who hid it there had attended services in that very church, had shaken hands with priests and parishioners alike, and had taken his secret to the grave 5 years before. His carefully hidden fortune would see daylight again. This is the story of Jerome Washington, an armored car guard who spent 3 years planning the perfect crime, executed it with surgical precision, and then demonstrated a level of patience and discipline that investigators would later describe as unprecedented. It's a story about faith and deception, about a man who hid in plain sight while living a modest life, never once touching the money he had risked everything to steal. And it's a story about how time, water damage, and the routine maintenance of a historic church would finally reveal the truth. Before we dive deeper into this incredible story, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. New Orleans in 1980 was a city still finding its rhythm after the economic turbulence of the previous decade. The French Quarter buzzed with tourists, the port remained one of the busiest in the nation, and money moved through the city in predictable patterns. Jerome Washington knew those patterns better than most. At 32 years old, he had worked for Crescent City Armored Transport for nearly 7 years, moving cash between banks, casinos, and businesses throughout the greater New Orleans area. He was reliable, punctual, and unremarkable. Exactly the kind of employee the company wanted behind the wheel of a truck carrying millions of dollars. But Jerome was drowning in debt that nobody knew about. His mother's medical bills from her battle with cancer had consumed his savings. His younger sister's tuition at Dillard University required constant financial support. His own modest salary of $28,000 a year barely covered his rent in a small apartment in the Treme neighborhood. He wasn't a gambler or a drinker. He didn't live extravagantly. He was simply a man trapped by circumstances, watching millions of dollars pass through his hands every day while his own life crumbled under financial pressure. Jerome began paying attention differently in early 1980, not with the casual awareness of a man doing his job, but with the focused intensity of someone studying a system for its weaknesses. He noticed that Thursday routes always included a pickup from the Magnolia Casino on Canal Street, where weekend gambling revenues were prepared for bank deposit. He observed that his partner, a 24-year-old named Travis Mills, was often hungover on Friday mornings and less attentive to protocol. He noted which bank branches had newer security systems and which relied on equipment installed in the early 70s. Most importantly, Jerome noticed the patterns of St. Augustine's Catholic Church, where he had attended services since childhood. The historic church, built in 1841, was undergoing gradual renovations to preserve its structure. Father Richard Dumas, the elderly priest who had baptized Jerome, often complained about the building's problems: the leaking roof, the warped floorboards, the constant need for repair. Jerome had volunteered for renovation work on weekends, helping to restore pews and repair exterior brickwork. In doing so, he had gained intimate knowledge of the building's layout, its basement, its crawl spaces, and the areas beneath the sanctuary floor that most parishioners never saw. The church held a particular advantage that Jerome recognized immediately. Major renovations were planned for 1985, 2 years in the future, when the Archdiocese would finally allocate funds to restore the sanctuary floor and upgrade the building's foundation. Until then, certain areas remained untouched and unmonitored. The space beneath the floorboards near the side altar, which sat on a raised platform, was accessible through a small access panel in the basement. It was dry, stable, and completely forgotten, except during the rare occasions when plumbing needed inspection. Jerome spent nearly a year just watching and learning. He studied the armored car company's procedures, memorizing the timing of radio check-ins, understanding the GPS tracking systems that were still relatively new technology in the early 80s. He learned which routes had the loosest supervision, which days saw the largest cash movements, and which security protocols were strictly enforced versus which had grown lax through repetition. He never asked suspicious questions. He never drew attention to his interest. He simply absorbed information with the patience of someone who understood that rushing would mean failure. By late 1981, Jerome had identified his opportunity. The Magnolia Casino pickup on Thursday afternoons involved moving cash from the casino's counting room to the armored truck, then driving to 3 different bank branches, before returning to the Crescent City Armored Transport Depot in Metairie. The route typically carried between $2.5 and $3.2 million, depending on the week. The cash was secured in locked canvas bags, which were then placed in the truck's reinforced cargo area. Standard protocol required 2 guards, but the company had been experiencing staffing shortages and occasionally sent trucks out with a single guard for short-range routes within the city. Jerome volunteered for every Thursday shift he could get. He built a reputation as someone reliable for the casino run, someone who knew the route and could handle it efficiently. He befriended the casino security staff, learning their procedures and schedules. He paid attention to which weeks generated the most revenue, noting that the first Thursday after major holiday weekends consistently produced the largest cash movements. The technical challenge was the GPS system. In 1983, vehicle tracking was primitive compared to modern standards, but Crescent City Armored Transport had installed basic transponders that radioed position updates every 15 minutes. Jerome couldn't simply disappear with a truck full of cash. Any deviation from the expected route would trigger alerts at the dispatch center. He needed to stay en route, make his scheduled stops, and somehow steal millions of dollars without anyone noticing until it was too late. His solution came from understanding the actual cargo handling procedures. The canvas bags weren't counted at every stop. They were scanned for tampering, checked against a manifest, and verified by weight. But the individual contents weren't examined until they reached their final destination at the bank's vault. If Jerome could substitute the contents of the bags during transport, the theft wouldn't be discovered until hours after he had completed his route and returned the empty truck to the depot. Jerome spent months acquiring the materials he would need. He bought canvas bags, identical to those used by the armored car company, purchasing them gradually from different suppliers to avoid suspicion. He collected old newspapers and cut them to size, bundling them to match the approximate weight and dimensions of cash stacks. He practiced the timing of switching bags, working in his apartment late at night to minimize the seconds required. He knew he would have only brief moments during the route when he could work unobserved. The hiding place required equal preparation. Jerome volunteered for more renovation work at St. Augustine's, specifically requesting to help with basement repairs. This gave him legitimate access to the areas beneath the church and allowed him to work unnoticed in spaces that few others ever visited. Over several months during weekend work sessions, Jerome carefully modified the access panel beneath the side altar platform. He created a concealed compartment by removing several floorboards and constructing a false bottom in the crawl space. The work was slow and meticulous, done in short increments when he was alone, always replaced perfectly so that casual inspection revealed nothing unusual. He lined the compartment with heavy plastic sheeting to protect against moisture. He calculated the dimensions to ensure it could hold the canvas bags he planned to hide. He tested the access route from the basement, timing how long it took to open the panel, place items inside, and restore everything to normal appearance. 3 minutes and 40 seconds. That was his window. Jerome also prepared his alibi and his cover story. He would claim the theft must have occurred at the casino or during one of the bank stops. He would express shock and confusion. He would cooperate fully with investigators. Most importantly, he would continue his normal life without any change in behavior or spending. The money would remain hidden for years if necessary. He had no intention of touching it immediately. His plan required the same patience in the aftermath that it demanded in the preparation. By October 1983, Jerome was ready. He had identified Thursday, October 13th as his target date. It fell after the Columbus Day weekend, when casino revenues were typically elevated. Weather forecasts predicted clear conditions, minimizing variables that could complicate timing. His partner for that week's Thursday route was Travis Mills, who Jerome knew would be recovering from Wednesday night drinking and less alert than usual. Everything aligned. The morning of October 13th began like any other workday for Jerome Washington. He arrived at the Crescent City Armored Transport Depot at 6:45 in the morning, 15 minutes early as always. He completed the vehicle inspection checklist, signed out his assigned truck, Unit Number 7, and verified the radio communication system. Travis Mills arrived at 7:30, looking exactly as expected. Tired, slightly hungover, going through the motions. They departed the depot at 7:55 for their first pickup of the day. The morning proceeded according to schedule. They made stops at 3 different businesses, collecting cash deposits and delivering change orders. Radio check-ins occurred every 15 minutes as required. Jerome maintained his usual professional demeanor, chatting casually with Travis about nothing significant, discussing weekend plans, and complaining mildly about the unseasonably warm weather. Everything was routine. They arrived at the Magnolia Casino at 2:15 in the afternoon. The casino's loading dock sat at the rear of the building, accessible through a secured gate that required radio clearance to open. Jerome backed the armored truck into position, while Travis radioed the security desk to announce their arrival. They went through the standard procedures, showing identification, signing the transfer logs, waiting while casino security brought out the locked canvas bags on a wheeled cart. There were 8 bags that afternoon, each one bulging with cash from the weekend's gambling revenue. The casino's head of security, a former police officer named Raymond Chen, supervised the transfer personally, as he always did. The bags were loaded into the truck's cargo area, their identification tags verified against the manifest. Total declared value, $2.7 million in mixed bills, primarily 20s, 50s, and 100s. The manifest showed the distribution: 4 bags containing roughly $500,000 each, 3 bags with $400,000, and 1 bag with $200,000 in smaller denominations. Travis signed the receipt and closed the cargo door. They departed the casino at 2:43, 8 minutes later than the scheduled 2:35 departure time. This slight delay was normal and unremarkable. Their next stop was First Commerce Bank on St. Charles Avenue, where they were scheduled to deliver 2 of the bags to the vault. The drive would take approximately 20 minutes through afternoon traffic. Jerome drove while Travis dozed in the passenger seat, his head tilted against the window. This was the moment Jerome had prepared for. 3 blocks from the casino, Jerome pulled into an alley behind an abandoned warehouse in the warehouse district. The location was carefully chosen. No security cameras, minimal foot traffic, and completely invisible from the main streets. He had scouted it dozens of times. He told Travis he needed to check a potential problem with the cargo door. Travis, barely conscious, mumbled agreement and remained in the cab. Jerome moved to the rear of the truck, using his key to open the cargo area. His hands moved with practiced efficiency. He had rehearsed these movements hundreds of times in his apartment. From beneath the truck's rear bumper, where he had hidden them the previous night during his final inspection, Jerome retrieved 8 canvas bags identical to those loaded at the casino. Each one was filled with carefully bundled newspapers, cut and stacked to approximate the weight and feel of currency. The switch took 2 minutes, and 50 seconds, Jerome moved the genuine bags containing $2.7 million to a concealed compartment he had constructed beneath the truck's false floor panel, accessed through a maintenance hatch. The dummy bags went into the main cargo area, arranged in the exact positions where the real bags had been. The identification tags were already attached, copied perfectly from samples Jerome had acquired months earlier. To casual inspection, nothing appeared different. Jerome closed the cargo door, returned to the driver's seat, and continued toward First Commerce Bank. Travis never woke up during the stop. The entire detour lasted less than 5 minutes. The GPS tracking showed them traveling along an acceptable route with a slight delay that could easily be attributed to traffic conditions. At First Commerce Bank, Jerome delivered 2 of the dummy bags to the vault receiving area. The bank's security personnel checked the identification tags, verified them against the manifest, and signed the receipt. The bags were placed on a cart for transport to the vault, where they would be counted later that evening during the normal end-of-day reconciliation process. By then, Jerome would be long gone. They proceeded to make 2 more bank stops, delivering additional dummy bags at each location. Travis remained largely inattentive, following procedures mechanically without really examining anything. At 4:35, they returned to the Crescent City Armored Transport Depot in Metairie. Jerome completed the standard end-of-shift procedures, turned in his paperwork, and clocked out at 4:55. Travis was already gone, having left 10 minutes earlier. Jerome drove his personal vehicle, a 1979 Chevrolet Impala, back into New Orleans. He stopped at a grocery store, bought items for dinner, and engaged in a brief conversation with the cashier about the weather. He was establishing his normal routine, appearing completely unremarkable. At 7:20 in the evening, he attended the 7:30 Mass at St. Augustine's, as he did every Thursday night. The church was quiet that evening. Approximately 30 parishioners were scattered throughout the pews. Father Dumas conducted the service with his usual gentle manner, his voice echoing in the high-ceilinged sanctuary. Jerome sat in his regular spot, 4th pew from the back on the left side, and participated in the service with genuine devotion. He prayed for forgiveness. He prayed for his mother's health. He prayed that no one would be hurt by what he had done. After the service ended at 8:45, Jerome waited until the church had mostly emptied. He approached Father Dumas, as he often did, and asked if he could spend some time in private prayer. The priest, knowing Jerome as a dedicated parishioner and volunteer, readily agreed. Jerome was often the last to leave the church. This behavior was entirely consistent with his established pattern. At 9:30, when the church was completely empty and Father Dumas had retired to the rectory next door, Jerome descended to the basement. He moved quickly but carefully, navigating the dimly lit corridors to the storage area beneath the sanctuary. The access panel was exactly where he had left it, concealed behind old filing cabinets that hadn't been moved in years. Jerome opened the panel and removed the false bottom he had constructed. The compartment beneath was dark, dry and secure. He returned to his car, parked in the church lot, and retrieved the 8 canvas bags from beneath the Impala's false trunk floor, a modification he had made months earlier. One by one, he carried the bags down to the basement and placed them in the concealed compartment. Each bag was wrapped in additional plastic sheeting for moisture protection. He arranged them carefully, ensuring they fit properly and that the weight was distributed evenly. The entire process took 47 minutes. When he finished, Jerome replaced the false bottom, closed the access panel, and moved the filing cabinets back into position. He spent an additional 10 minutes in the sanctuary, genuinely praying before locking up the church and returning home. He arrived at his apartment at 11:15 and went to sleep. The theft was discovered the following morning when First Commerce Bank opened their vault for the daily count. The canvas bags delivered the previous afternoon contained nothing but bundled newspapers. The bank immediately contacted Crescent City Armored Transport, which quickly determined that all 8 bags from the casino pickup were worthless. By 10:30 Friday morning, the FBI had been notified of the theft. Special Agent Diana Foster was assigned to lead the investigation. A 12-year veteran of the FBI's New Orleans field office, Foster had worked numerous armored car cases and understood the typical patterns of such crimes. Her initial assessment was that this theft was significantly different from the usual scenarios. The sophisticated nature of the bag switch, the timing, and the apparent planning suggested someone with inside knowledge and extraordinary patience. Jerome Washington and Travis Mills were interviewed separately on Friday afternoon. Travis seemed genuinely shocked and confused, his alibis for the previous evening checking out completely. He had gone directly to a bar after work, where numerous witnesses confirmed his presence until nearly midnight. Jerome, meanwhile, was calm and cooperative. He expressed disbelief that such a theft could have occurred. He confirmed the timeline of events, described the routine pickup at the casino, and explained that he had noticed nothing unusual during the route. His alibi was ironclad. Multiple witnesses placed him at the grocery store, then at the church for Mass, then praying in the sanctuary afterward. Father Dumas confirmed that Jerome had been the last to leave, locking up as he often did as a trusted volunteer. Security footage from the grocery store showed Jerome shopping at exactly the time he claimed. Everything checked out. The investigation focused heavily on the mechanics of the theft. How had the bags been switched? When did it occur? Where was the money now? Agent Foster's team analyzed the GPS tracking data from Truck Unit 7. They found no significant deviations from the expected route. The timeline showed normal progress with only minor delays consistent with traffic conditions. There was no unexplained stop, no period when the truck was stationary in an unusual location. This puzzled investigators. The switch must have happened somewhere between the casino and the first bank delivery, but the GPS data showed the truck moving continuously along a reasonable route. Foster theorized that Jerome or Travis might have had an accomplice who intercepted them briefly, but surveillance of both men revealed no suspicious contacts or relationships. The FBI examined Jerome's financial records exhaustively. His bank accounts showed modest balances consistent with his salary. He had no hidden accounts, no unexplained deposits, no sudden purchases. His apartment was searched with his full cooperation. Agents found nothing but the possessions of a man living a modest, financially stressed life. His car was inspected and found to contain nothing unusual, though agents did not discover the false trunk floor, which Jerome had carefully restored to normal appearance days after the theft. Travis Mills was eventually cleared as a suspect after polygraph tests, and extensive background investigation revealed nothing suspicious. He had gambling debts and a drinking problem, but no connection to organized crime or any apparent means of executing such a sophisticated theft. The investigation increasingly focused on Jerome, but without evidence, no charges could be filed. Jerome continued working at Crescent City Armored Transport for another 6 months, though he was never again assigned to high-value routes. He was under constant surveillance, but investigators observed nothing incriminating. He worked, he attended church, he visited his mother in the hospital, he helped his sister with her studies. He lived his normal life without any variation in behavior or spending. In April 1984, Jerome resigned from Crescent City Armored Transport, citing his desire to find work closer to his mother, who was now in hospice care. This explanation seemed reasonable and natural. He took a job as a security guard at a hospital in the Garden District, earning slightly less than his previous salary, but requiring a shorter commute. His mother passed away in July 1984. Jerome used his modest savings and a small life insurance payout to cover funeral expenses. The FBI investigation continued for 3 years, but without any breaks in the case, it gradually lost priority. Agent Foster remained convinced that Jerome Washington was responsible, but she could never prove it. The case file grew thick with reports and theories, but no evidence ever materialized. The money had simply vanished. Jerome Washington lived quietly in New Orleans for the next 17 years. He worked as a security guard, eventually moving to positions at different facilities around the city. He helped his sister finish college and later supported her through graduate school. He remained active at St. Augustine's, attending services regularly and continuing to volunteer for renovation and maintenance projects. He never married, though he dated occasionally. He lived in the same modest apartment in Tremé, driving the same aging Chevrolet until it finally gave out in 1992. To everyone who knew him, Jerome was a good man who had endured personal tragedy with grace and dignity. He was soft-spoken, reliable and kind. He helped elderly parishioners with yard work, donated what little he could to church fundraisers, and mentored young men in the neighborhood about staying away from crime and drugs. The irony was not lost on Jerome himself. The money remained hidden beneath St. Augustine's through the church's 1985 renovations. The sanctuary floor was indeed restored, but the work focused on the main aisle and the area immediately in front of the altar. The side altar platform, where Jerome's compartment was hidden, was deemed structurally sound and not in need of major work. The access panel in the basement remained forgotten and untouched. Jerome thought about the money constantly during the first year. He lay awake some nights, anxious that it might be discovered, that someone would stumble upon it during routine maintenance. He experienced moments of paranoia, imagining FBI agents following him, suspecting that his phone might be tapped. But as years passed and nothing happened, the anxiety faded into something else. A strange comfort in knowing that his plan had worked, mixed with genuine regret for what he had done. He never intended to touch the money for at least 10 years. Then 10 years became 15, then 20. The longer it remained hidden, the more Jerome questioned whether he would ever retrieve it. The man who had committed the theft in 1983 was not quite the same man living in 2001. His mother's death had changed him. His sister's successful career, she became a professor at Tulane University, filled him with pride that was complicated by the knowledge of how he had helped make it possible. His faith, which had been somewhat cynical when he hid stolen money in a church, had become genuine and deep. In 2001, Jerome was diagnosed with lung cancer. He had never smoked, and the diagnosis came as a shock. The irony was cruel. He had stolen millions to pay his mother's medical bills, and now he faced the same struggle she had endured. But Jerome didn't touch the hidden money. He couldn't bring himself to do it. Instead, he used the hospital's financial assistance programs, relied on his sister's help, and accepted the modest benefits his insurance provided. He died in November 2001, at the age of 53, in the same hospital where he had worked as a security guard. His sister, Dr. Carmen Washington, was with him at the end. He never told her about the money. He never told anyone. His last confession to Father Thomas Griffin, who had replaced the retired Father Dumas in 1995, mentioned only his general sins and failings, his doubts about his worthiness of God's love. He did not mention the $2.7 million hidden beneath the church floor. The secret would have died with Jerome Washington if not for Hurricane Katrina and the years of recovery that followed. St. Augustine's suffered significant damage during the 2005 storm. The roof was compromised, water poured through the building, and the historic structure seemed in danger of being abandoned like so many other New Orleans landmarks. But the congregation rallied, fundraising intensified, and by 2006, serious restoration work was finally underway. Father Michael O'Brien, a 42-year-old priest from Boston who had volunteered to serve in post-Katrina New Orleans, arrived at St. Augustine's in January 2006. He was energetic, hands-on, and determined to help restore the historic church. When contractors identified water damage beneath the sanctuary floor in August 2006, Father O'Brien insisted on inspecting it personally before authorizing costly repairs. On August 17, 2006, Father O'Brien descended into the basement with a flashlight and a crowbar, intent on assessing the extent of the damage. He moved through the storage areas, checking for mold and structural problems. When he reached the space beneath the side altar platform, he noticed that the walls seemed damp and several cardboard boxes of old records had been destroyed by water infiltration. As he moved boxes to assess the damage, he accidentally knocked over a filing cabinet. It shifted, revealing the access panel that Jerome had used 23 years earlier. The panel itself showed signs of water damage around the edges, the wood swollen and warped. Father O'Brien pried it open, expecting to find pipes or electrical conduits. Instead, he found 8 canvas bags wrapped in deteriorating plastic sheeting. The plastic had protected the contents from the worst of the water damage, but moisture had penetrated enough that the canvas bags were discolored and musty. Father O'Brien pulled out one of the bags. Confused about why someone would store old church supplies in such an odd location, when he opened the bag, bundled stacks of cash spilled out onto the basement floor. Father O'Brien immediately contacted the New Orleans Police Department. Officers arrived within 30 minutes, and by that evening, FBI agents were on scene. The bags were carefully removed and transported to the FBI field office. Initial inspection confirmed that the bags were identical to those used by armored car companies in the early 1980s. The cash, though musty and water-damaged, was largely intact. The total amount recovered was approximately $2.6 million. Some bills had deteriorated beyond recovery, but the vast majority of the money was still valid currency. Special Agent Raymond Torres, who had reviewed the old case files as part of his training, immediately recognized the potential connection to the unsolved 1983 Crescent City armored transport heist. The amount, the location, and the timing all aligned. Diana Foster, now retired and living in Florida, was contacted and asked to consult on the case. She flew to New Orleans within days. The investigation that followed was more archaeological than typical detective work. Agents interviewed longtime parishioners about the church's history, searching for any connection that might explain how the money ended up there. Carmen Washington, now a well-respected professor, was interviewed about her brother. She was shocked to learn about the discovery and struggled to reconcile it with her memories of Jerome DNA. Evidence from the plastic sheeting and canvas bags was tested against samples from Jerome's personal effects, which Carmen still possessed. The results confirmed that Jerome had handled the materials used to wrap the money. Investigators examined church records and found documentation of Jerome's volunteer work during the early 1980s, including specific dates when he had worked on basement repairs. They discovered tool marks on the access panel consistent with the carpentry skills Jerome was known to possess. The circumstantial evidence was overwhelming. Jerome Washington had stolen the money, hidden it in the church where he worshipped, and then lived his life without ever retrieving it. The FBI closed the case in December 2006, concluding that the perpetrator was deceased and that the recovery of the stolen funds represented a successful resolution, albeit one that took 23 years to achieve. The Magnolia Casino, which had suffered the loss in 1983, received the recovered money minus funds withheld for evidence. After adjusting for inflation and accounting for the deteriorated bills, they recovered approximately 85% of the original theft. The casino's insurance company, which had paid out the claim in 1984, received the funds. The casino itself was purchased by a larger entertainment corporation in 1995 and no longer operated under the same ownership. Carmen Washington was not charged with any crime, as investigators found no evidence she had known about the theft. She cooperated fully with the investigation, providing information about her brother's life and circumstances. She established a scholarship fund in Jerome's name, using her own money, dedicated to supporting students whose families faced medical financial crises. She described her brother as a good man who made a terrible mistake, and she spent the rest of her life trying to honor the better parts of his character. Father O'Brien oversaw the continued restoration of St. Augustine's, which was completed in 2008. The church installed a small plaque in the sanctuary, acknowledging its survival through multiple challenges, including natural disasters and the passage of time. The plaque made no mention of the money discovered in the basement. That story became part of the church's private history, discussed in whispers but not publicly celebrated. The case of Jerome Washington remains a study in patience, planning, and the psychological complexity of crime. Security experts have analyzed his methods extensively, noting the sophistication of his bag-switching technique and his understanding of GPS tracking limitations in the early 1980s. The case led to improved protocols for armored car companies, including more frequent verification of cargo contents and enhanced tracking systems that report position data continuously rather than at intervals. But perhaps the most haunting aspect of the case is Jerome's decision never to retrieve the money. Investigators and psychologists have debated his motivations endlessly. Did he experience genuine remorse? Did fear of detection keep him away? Did his deepening faith make it impossible for him to benefit from a crime committed in a church? The answer likely contains elements of all three, mixed with the simple passage of time that can transform a person's values and priorities. Diana Foster, in an interview before her death in 2018, reflected on the case with mixed feelings. She had been right about Jerome Washington all along, but the validation came too late and felt hollow. She noted that Jerome had harmed fewer people than most criminals she had pursued. The casino's insurance covered the loss. No one was physically hurt. Jerome used none of the money for himself in any meaningful way, and yet the crime remained a crime, a violation of trust and law that could not be excused by the passage of time or the criminal's subsequent behavior. The case reminds us that crime is rarely as simple as good versus evil. Jerome Washington was both a dedicated son and brother, a faithful churchgoer and volunteer, and a man who carefully planned and executed a multi-million-dollar theft. He lived with the weight of his secret for 18 years, never enjoying the fruits of his crime, never unburdening himself of the truth. In the end, water damage and the determination of a priest to inspect his church personally accomplished what decades of FBI investigation could not, revealing the truth hidden in plain sight, beneath the worn floorboards of a church where people gathered to pray for forgiveness. The discovery at St. Augustine's sent ripples through law enforcement communities across the country. Federal agents reopened dozens of cold cases involving armored car thefts from the 1980s, searching for similar patterns of patient criminals who might have hidden their proceeds and died before retrieving them. 3 additional cases in Detroit, Baltimore, and Phoenix showed promising similarities, though none were definitively connected to hidden caches. Crescent City Armored Transport, which had been absorbed by a national security corporation in 1997, used the case as a training example for new employees. The company implemented mandatory psychological evaluations for guards handling high-value routes and installed redundant verification systems that required multiple checkpoints during transport. The Jerome Washington case became required reading in security management courses, illustrating how insider threats remain the most difficult to detect and prevent. Carmen Washington struggled with her brother's legacy for years after the discovery. She found herself questioning every memory, every conversation, every moment of their shared history. Had Jerome's generosity toward her education been motivated by guilt? Had his kindness to others been genuine or merely camouflage? In therapy sessions, she gradually came to accept that people contain multitudes, that her brother could be both the loving family member she remembered and the calculating criminal revealed by the investigation. She never visited the church after the discovery. The building held too many complicated emotions, too many questions without satisfying answers. But she understood why Jerome had chosen that location. In his own twisted way, he had been seeking something. Absolution, perhaps, or the illusion of control over his sin by placing it literally at the feet of God. The money had become his burden, his secret cross to bear, hidden in the one place that represented both his crime and his conscience. When he died without ever reclaiming it, perhaps that was his final act of penance, leaving the stolen fortune buried and forgotten, a confession written in cash that no one would read for 23 years.